discussion, but Achille.
Okay, I will be brief, since Sarah mentioned that I had been too long.
I'll leave you to 4 minutes.
And this will allow me to escape answering Michael's very difficult question. Yes, I mean, the remarks were telegraphic, and I think that you are right to query whether or not, I mean, talking about contemporary China, whether to say China's capitalism makes sense at all. But I would extend the same question to various other places, especially in the continent of Africa, where, as I was arguing, not only capitalism has taken different trajectories, maybe none of which is reducible to some abstract entity, but where also it seems to me the modalities of capitalist expansion have not been as uniform as we usually imagine. I was using, in this case, the work of James Ferguson, who indeed argues that the process of capitalist globalization has been uneven, and that within the same geographical space, the dominant mode in which this expansion has operated is through what he calls hopping or something like that. Meaning, okay, you stop in Shanghai and then you bypass all the area between Shanghai and Beijing, and then you stop in Beijing, you plug in Beijing, and then you bypass many other areas before plugging, let's say, Seoul, or for that matter, the capital of Taiwan, which are the name of Taipei, yes. Because the point is really to understand how is it that we can reanimate the world we live in. Reanimate it in the spaces of everyday life that are ours. Can we reanimate it by simply with technologies, the iPhone and that? Or are there other, let's say, parallel ways of reanimating it, which we see operating, for instance, in the spread of, to use that one example, Pentecostal religious movements, for instance, where indeed the problem is not really about fakes as such. The problem is about setting up a modality of trafficking, which involves the use, the assembling and disassembling and reassembling of whatever one might put one's hands onto, and realigning it for the purpose of making a life, what David called today a philosophy of life or philosophy of living. It seems to me that it's from that perspective that we can make sense both of Zimmel's interrogation and the question of truth, which presupposes what is not truth. But what is not truth is not necessarily fake as such. The contrary of truth is not necessarily fake. It might be something else.
Sarah, did you want to?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are lots of questions that remain after reading that Latour piece, which I spoke about. Maybe we need an idea of things that is really much more unstable than he suggests, including human things, and that we move in and out of objecthood and thinghood. That things move in and out of objecthood and thinghood and keep falling back into objecthood and things, and keep being seen as objects and then things. It seems to me that it's much more messy than he suggests. I mean, things can imply this kind of artful self-manipulation and knowingness, and sort of granting of an ethical life. But I think that there's that the world itself is constantly slipping back into seeing others and otherness as objects. So that would be just one comment that I think he doesn't deal with. That what are the residual effects of hegemony, ideology, race, etc. I think he doesn't really go there. In the sense of being sort of quite decisively post-social, yeah. No, Carol.
I was going to say, but in the sense of he gives a sense of the assemblage, doesn't he, that is productively helpful in that sense, no?
Yeah, I think so. But the problem is how to read some of what he's saying about things back into notions of beauty and ugliness, notions of cultural contingency, and so on. I mean, what is it that we retain and what is it that we discard about the way things look and the way people see? Something about that. In the sense of the post-sociological, I was really thinking that increasingly the notion of reading off things, the social or the political, inscription is becoming increasingly impossible, it seems to me. And what we're really involved in is reading the social lives of forms. And I think that's what Latour is so good at doing. And that what we used to think about as a sort of politics of resistance is really sort of segued its way into a politics of restyling, of styling the self, and of accessorization. So those are the sorts of terrains that I'd be interested in thinking about.
Since I've not done some of the homework, so I wouldn't be able to comment on some of the text. But I can tell you my latest discovery on the issue of fake. Actually, it had to do with my conspiracy theory a bit. It seems that often people think, on a ethical ground, that the people who copy, to make the fake, is the people who are actually taking the initiatives in these whole production. The production of fake is because people want to copy them and then sell them to make a profit. However, I wonder now that because fake is such a well-known part of the market economy and theorized by Akbar and probably others, that a lot of these companies, luxury and big design companies, they are aware of that production. Actually, they are consciously to feed in that production in some ways. And so there is a Japanese fashion designer. His name is Rei Kawakubo. He's pretty famous. So he has had this brand Comme des Garçons for maybe 30, 40 years by now. And then because of the complexity of the materials she uses, and the expensiveness of her production, I don't think she was copied much. Somehow I suspect that became an issue for her brand. So she in very recent years.
Plagiarism is the greatest form of flattery.
And so she started. They all have all these multiple lines, but one of the line has no technological content, and there's no really really no design. It's a bloody T-shirt with often a red or green face printed. A face with two big eyes. You see them all over. And that's called Comme des Garçons play. So my theory is that was invented, that was designed to be copied. So anyway, so 2 points, right? One is that, again, design is really about a strategy. But that strategy in this case, is used in the market economy for promotion, for expanding the market, and so on. But also I like to say that really the notion of design, in case of the making of fake, is getting so complex. So that's what makes anyone who works in the field actually exciting.
Could I push you a little bit on how you see the contemporary China context in that sense? Because even from what little that I have found out or had discussions with people in the last couple of years, there seems to be a significant difference between a line both here and in other parts of the world that makes an argument that progress, modernization, what Achille was talking about as the catching up, if you like, Whiggish theory of progress and modernization, depends on clear property rights. And there's an argument in some cases from some quarters about the importance of clarifying property rights. But at the same time, there are strong arguments in other places about the advantage of fuzzy property rights and uncertainty. And you were talking a little bit about the ethical dilemmas of design and how those translate through uses that are found subsequently. So I just wondered how you saw that context in, not least in architecture, where sometimes in a lot of buildings there's a lot of, I've seen even in our limited research, a lot of people kind of getting very worried about people going in, photographing design and replicating a building or replicating a structure very...
Well, in the context of there's three modern words we use, modernity, modernization, and modernism, right? And but if we talk about fake, actually that's pretty much the absolute, because the kind of morality we attach to the notion of fake, as you were saying, what is genuine, what is fake. That's pretty new for Chinese, because the Chinese art traditionally wasn't really big about innovation. So to learn art is to copy, and then there's never really a genuine, absolute fake. It all depends on who's copying what, with what kind of a skill. If it's Zhang Daqian, a really important art figure in the late Qing dynasty and early Republic, if something he copied, it could even on the market would have worth more possibly than the original. And then, so it's always a matter of degree. Somehow, I think, comes with modernity, and today, although it seems it's all about blue jeans at McDonald's, but I wonder a lot of not only Western, American, even kind of a Christian morality is being imported. Yeah. So a lot of black and white thinking, which for the world of design actually is not terribly interesting.
Thank you. I also, when you're talking, it reminds me that I know that Liu Fan Li who's coming here tomorrow, I think, or the day after, has an argument about the vernacular modernity of Shanghai in his work. But also, I think we've just about hit the 3:30 mark. But I suppose just to hopefully we'll open up the discussion now after the coffee break. But I just end with a personal appeal on the agency of things, which struck me in this building, that if you go to Shanghai, into Hong Kong, you always see in the elevator the building starts with a ground floor and then a first floor, second floor onwards. In most of China, what I understand as a British solipsist, the building starts with a ground floor, then first floor. Where the Americans start first floor, second floor, third floor. I found it interesting in the lift, and if anyone can help me, I'd be interested to know that if you get in the lift in this part of Shanghai, whether it's a post-colonial echo or not, hardly in the elevator, I would guess, the building itself has a ground floor, a first floor, a second floor, up to our 14th floor. So hopefully that won't be any excuse for people not to be back here on time for a very prompt start on the 14th floor, or if you are from America, that is the 15th floor, I guess. But we'll see you at 4 o'clock. Sorry, the refreshment. Yeah. See a forest of hands. Yes, go on. And maybe, if, again, just to, I guess it's the first day, if people can just remind everybody by saying who they are before they open up.
Hi, I'm Earl Ty from Parsons. My comment and question is addressed to Professor Nuttall. I appreciate what you're saying about the need or potential to move beyond understanding of commodity relations and beyond post-consumerist kind of point of view, and to look at ways in which our possessions may be taking over and may be possessing us. And I'm reminded of the early example of the Apple iPhone. And from one perspective, we look at Apple owning the iPhone, and then we have these copies. But if we look at it from another perspective, we're possessed by the iPhone, or even we're possessed by a concept of an ideal iPhone, by the promise of these, that Latour promises, of these designs that are going to solve all of our problems, these designs that make a better life for us. And so there's this ideal iPhone floating out there that Apple is constantly in fear of not reaching. So there's this fear of impotence. And so we are constantly having to reach for it, so that we're now possessed, not even by the things that we make, but we're possessed by the possibility of the things that we can make. I wonder if Ms. Nuttall would like to follow up on her comments and look at the ways in which we might consider how our possessions are indeed possessing us.
You all right? Okay, maybe we can take a few questions, then people will come back.
I'm Joanne Chu. I'm from the University of Michigan. So this question is for Sarah Nuttall as well. And it's a reflection of my own work and my own thinking, so it might come out as sort of a bricolage in itself. But I'm really intrigued by this question that you raised about rehabilitating the concept of design, taking something that we know and making it unknown, and how that relates to what you were saying at the end in terms of urban landscapes and reinterpreting buildings. My question is about what happens to history in these interpretations and reinterpretations, and what is the use or value of having possibly limitless readings. How might these readings speak to history itself? And are these reinterpretations actually repetitions? So it's multi-pronged. I apologize for that.
Okay, and we'll take maybe one or two more, but certainly one here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Chevy Hotels from Colombia, and I'd like to point that Professor Mbembe point our attention towards the economical context in which design is happening. And I wonder if we can start talking about whether is it the same design that happened in Shanghai, that happens in smaller cities, that happens in the west of China, that happens in Qinghai, in the northwest? Are we talking about the same design? Is it design possible? Or it's just it's something that happened in Beijing, Hong Kong, Shanghai, maybe Chengdu, but is it happening in Xi'an? Is it happening in smaller cities?
Okay.
I'm Vinay Lal. I wanted to direct a couple of comments to Achille. This is regarding an observation that he had made, where he said that histories of design under late capitalism have become inseparable from histories of waste. My two comments are the following. The first is I'm trying to understand what is the particular salience of late capitalism in this observation, because it seems to me that if you look at the history of colonialism, I think the idea of waste has in fact been actually quite critical. So it's not simply late capitalism that one is speaking of, but if you go back to the 18th century, I can think of India, I can think of Africa, I can think of how the trope of waste was used, and an analogous trope that is the idea of terra nullis, that these are all empty lands which are in fact wasteful, right? And I think this is important because, in fact, if one thinks of the epistemological imperatives of the colonial state, one can certainly speak of colonies by design, so to speak, right? So I'm trying to understand whether there is a different register of meaning that comes in under late capitalism than would be the case under colonialism. And secondly, this is simply perhaps a suggestion, but it seems to me that the idea of spoliage might have more analytical purchase, particularly if we're thinking of design, rather than the idea of waste. Because particularly if you think of histories of architectural conquest and cultural conquest, it seems to me that we can use the idea of spoliage very productively to speak about how buildings are built, rebuilt, destroyed, redesigned. And in fact, in some respect, the history of colonialism itself is a history of spoliage. So I was wondering if you might consider that possibility, because I think that the idea of waste in that sense does not have the same kind of analytical purchase that perhaps something like spoliage might have.
Okay, we'll take those and then come back for another round. Sarah, did you want to start?
Yeah. Just want to find my... Now, the idea of being possessed by possessions... just to restate what I had in mind, that we really need to stop thinking as clearly as we have been, with the clarity that we think we have about things as objects of consumption. Partly in order to see how our relationship to things just can't be explained purely by the cultural logic of capitalism, that there's something else there, and that what we're trying to bring to life is not just something but another side of all things, you know, a place which is deeply affective in many ways and that we have not yet explained. So it's really drawing on what we're talking about, which is that objects are things via which human thought unfolds. And working with that idea, I simply want to ask questions about the extent to which we confine objects and things to consumer culture, consumerism, and the kinds of critiques of consumerism that we make as a result of that, as neocolonial in the African context, sort of neocolonialism, and so on, or as confined to the languages of surfaces, where we still take the language of analysis to be the language of depth. You know, everything that's deep, everything that's underneath, everything that has traction, carries with it history, the symptom, and so on. But I do think that that in a sense we reclaiming the language of surfaces, which is often the space of consumption, as an analytic space, which is really far more interesting than we've allowed it to be so far. So that would be my comment there. The question about rehabilitating design and what that would mean for thinking about urban landscapes and what happens to history. Well, I don't know. What we've been talking about this morning is a sense that history becomes just one of the frames we look at, which is in itself quite a defamiliarizing way of thinking about history. After all, so much explanation proceeds from the fact that history determines the present and determines in an incredibly potent way who we are now. If we relegate history to just one aspect of who we are, we see a different picture. But I wanted to answer your question in a somewhat more concrete vein, which is, okay, so what would it mean in terms of designing a building and thinking through the history of a city? Take, for example, an apartheid city. How could you use design to break with the past while understanding that the past animates in part what you're doing? And do we have the time for an example, or shall I move on? Yeah, do we? Okay, since I spoke so briefly before, you indulge me. Okay. Think of this. Think of the fact that Johannesburg is a city like LA, I mean, we're somewhere between Kinshasa, Cairo, and LA altogether. Johannesburg is a city which is really defined by its lack of public space and by its mall cultures. Okay, so how do you reanimate street life in Johannesburg? Here's what one architect did. She took a house on a small street, and she was asked to design a shop for Paul Smith clothing, which, as you know, is a sort of high-powered, clothing design shop. What she did was she took the roof off the house and she cantilevered a great big pink box on top of the house on a small street in Johannesburg. Here's what she says about the pink box on top of the house. Paul Smith is a kind of blind box, a mall prototype, a deaf mute in bright pink glass, non-transparent, a floating mall in the trees, a branding exercise, no shop windows to speak of, a blank billboard, a container, a sealed box, an exclusion. The interior and the shop wares are hidden. This is the language of Johannesburg, of the outer suburbs come to town, to a small street where it is still possible to walk and talk. This is the culture of Johannesburg, its knowingness, its insider knowledge, its two desires, display and concealment, its glittering hard surfaces, its controlled entries, its paranoia, its hidden lush interiors, its mania for branding. This building treats these things, but it treats them critically. It treats them in a way that does not threaten the street. It speaks to its specific place, Joburg, and it speaks to the world. I just want to take that as an example of a floating mall in the trees above a small suburban house, which becomes the Paul Smith shop in Johannesburg. Because it seems to me that it has a kind of language of self-consciousness. It is able to perform the function of critique based on the past of this city, which is an apartheid past. It's a critique of kind of mall culture, of a lack of public spaces. So I'm wondering if we couldn't just take this thinking about things that we're doing and start use it to think about cities and intervening in cities self-consciously, which after all is a highly modernist practice, and within the spirit of critique. So it's not just remaking and remodeling and restyling, that within that process is a politics, which in this case is asking citizens to reflect on the kind of mallification of their city and the kind of remaking of the street. So I think that what we're being asked to do in this kind of thinking about things is to draw on history at certain key moments, to perform a function of critique, to create citizens who think about their cities in certain kinds of ways through design. So it's a kind of roundabout way of responding to you, but it seems to me that it's not just the notion of restyling and redesigning is not necessarily, if we use it carefully and ethically, just repetition. It seems to me that one draws in history and politics there, but with a kind of lightness and as a kind of accessory, if you like, in a process of making, which is multiple. Yeah.
Achille.
First, Javier's question. Whether design happens in the same way everywhere, certainly not. Which is another way of maybe asking me to be specific about what I mean by design. And what I did is that I refused to be specific precisely in order to allow the term to resonate, in as many different fields as possible. I think that the material conditions under which people traffic with things, objects, in which they produce signs and they produce artifacts, speech, including and images in the broad anthropological meaning of the term, that those material conditions do matter. And And the argument was that under conditions of scarcity and uncertainty, which after all are those conditions under which the majority of the population of the world lives in. I mean, only a minority lives in conditions of seeming stability, although as we have realized over the last few months, that stability is not a given neither. So under such conditions, my intuition was that people hardly have the luxury to design their lives, because embedded in the notion of design is some sense of control over some kind of future that might be immediate or medium term or long term. Now there is no design without that. So under conditions where the future is not a given, and it's not a given for lots of people, under such conditions, it seems to me that processes of composition were one very plausible way in which we could account for what David called practice of life making in all its senses. So as you see, I'm running away from the concept of design in this case and putting forward another concept of composition, which it seems to me is an echo or an onomatopoeic rendering of design in context of scarcity. Now, the other big question on late capitalism, I mean, it's so terrible, because every time we use a term, we have to pause and define it. We need a dictionary. I mean, we constantly need to work with a dictionary. But I understand the point you are making. I use late capitalism very loosely. But at the same time, it seemed to me that there was, I mean, under colonialism, if you want, I'll give an example. Colonialism or apartheid. Let's say, what seems to me to characterize late capitalism, among many other things, is the fact that more than at earlier phases of capitalism, it produces an enormous amount of what we could call superfluous people. People who are superfluous, meaning people who are not at all, you don't need to exploit them. Where as we witness in most parts of the world, where it's better today to be exploited than to not be exploited at all. Where people are reduced to that level. And I see it, I mean, where I live in Johannesburg. Under colonialism and apartheid, and if we factor the question of race, which you alluded to, look, race operated, it produced a category of people who are indispensable for the workings of capitalism. That's why we needed black labor and all of that. So, dispensable for the workings of capitalism, but not at all dispensable in terms of the workings of the polity. That we had that tension between dispensability and indispensability. What I'm suggesting with the term late capitalism is that tension is no longer there, because you just don't need a whole bunch of people. You can operate, produce, consume without them. So that production of superfluity, it seems to me, is absolutely characteristic of what I was trying to mean by late capitalism. I take note of your notion of spoilage I think probably combined with that of waste, we could come up with a more systematic rendering of these processes.
I can respond to your question, the gentleman from Colombia. You're asking if design is a phenomenon only for the major coastal cities or for some other Chinese cities as well. It really depends on what you're talking about. As far as design as the creative industry, or rather design culture, it happens in the major coastal metropolises. Last year, the city of Shenzhen got the title from UNESCO as the capital of design for China. It may sound a little absurd, but actually they have quite a concentration for architects and graphic designers and few, but really quite strong industrial designers and so on. Shanghai has the largest concentration of our top fashion designers just outside this hotel. On Chang, you'll find some of them and so on. And then Beijing as well. And then if you talk about consumption of design, the capital actually is Hangzhou. Hangzhou is south of Shanghai and in the province of Zhejiang, because there's one city which is called Wenzhou. That's where this new form of market economy and started. In a way, that's Shenzhen and Wenzhou are the birthplaces for the Chinese version of market economy. So not only they consume design, in terms of luxury goods. If you go to Hangzhou, you have the largest Gucci and whatever, and then they have the highest number of private jets and so on. They also consume technology. So that's kind of a very uneven kind of a picture we have. And talking about the connection between waste and I don't really know the definition of late capitalism, and I'm afraid I don't even know how to really define colonialism. But one thing I like to say today, design does produce a lot of waste in two ways. One is that design is often associated with very expensive production. And secondly, design often is all about options. And we actually don't need those options, but they what they do, because design in the end is really about the production of desire. That's how design feeds into the again market economy. So rather unfortunately, so design does produce a huge amount of waste.
I've got 4 more questions just coming through. But just before, could you say a bit more about the relationship between the Wenzhou Shenzhen phenomenon in Shanghai? I know that one of the things one of my colleagues was reading about just last week was some stories in the Shanghai press about some of the Wenzhou entrepreneurs buying up a lot of housing in Shanghai, and then some, I think they're called Chaofang, frying the housing, literally. And so there's a kind of slight ambivalence about some of the relationships.
So basically, is this now that we're going through the third wave of urbanization in China. Basically, the first is really just production of spaces, and then for the sake of economic development. So the quality of life wasn't an issue at all. So the second wave, when the cities and some people did get richer, and then they want to do this makeover, beautification of architecture and urban spaces, and they have done so. And we are in the moment today that some of the cities start to say that we are not only in a city to get a job, to start our own businesses, but actually we want to live in the city. And then it starts to really have a totally different pattern of migration. It happens to Shanghai from these super wealthy Wenzhou folks. They, if you haven't heard from Wenzhou, they actually, that's the kind of Chinese folks you meet in Europe for most part. They have a very distinct dialect. It doesn't sound like Chinese at all, but it is. It's just the accent is very unusual, and you don't see them in the U.S. Yeah, right. And then they are fantastic entrepreneurs and so on. And then for Beijing, for instance, Stephen Hall designed this hybrid ring. It's super expensive. It's the price of the real estate in Manhattan. They all bought up by, it's really is mind-boggling. So coal mine owners from Shanxi. So these people, now they're in Beijing and in Shanghai, no longer to open up their new businesses. Their businesses are back in the towns where they came from, but they're in the cities to enjoy life. So, and that's part of this third wave of urbanization.
Designed urbanism. I have four more questions. 5. I think we'll take those 5 and then come back for another round. Maybe I've got 1 at the back, 2 in the middle, and 2 near the front. So maybe.
Hi.
Then we'll come over.
My name is Ching Chen, and I'm from UC Riverside. My question is for Achille. Thank you for your comments about power and aesthetics. I guess I was wondering, in terms of what you're talking about, the power, in terms of composition, could that also be seen as a mode of power? And I'm wondering about different types of power, not just state power. For instance, like the power of numbers, or the power of those that are left out, or perhaps more anarchist forms of power, and how that relates to the power of rule, or the design of rule, and if you could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, and then we've got 2 in...
Hu Ying, UC Irvine. This is also a question for Achille and also about aesthetics of power. I was interested in your concept, your definition of the fake as when the aesthetics of power fails. I wondered what you meant by fails and if you could elaborate on that. And that fails how? Let's take the example of the iPhone made in Shenzhen. The quote-unquote genuine article doesn't work. And then the fake works. So how does an item fail in design in this sense? Linking back to what Akbar was saying this morning about good or not so good designer, I wonder if the good designer is the one that would fail.
Okay, I'm Gabriele Schwab. I'm also from UC Irvine, and it's not a question to anyone in particular, but I would like to draw out something that I thought was a subtext of the entire conversation this afternoon, and it concerns the relationship between design as reflection and then design versus design as seduction and conspiracy. And I would like to start with Chang Hang Yoho's phrase, if design makes sense, people will use it. And also linking this to design's goal, the improvement of people's life. If I link this back to what Akbar said in the morning about the eye-mind disconnect and Achille's emphasis on the sensorial, could we not also say if design seduces the senses, people will use it? And then I wondered if we could link the sensorial and the affective aspect of design to what Chang Yang-ho called the conspiracy, because it seems to me that there's a dynamic of design, secrecy, and surprise that is very effective and very seductive. If we think about the best advertisements, it's usually those where you don't catch right away what the product is that is advertised, where you really, and this has become inflationary, where sometimes there's a whole narrative and you begin to wonder what the product is that is advertised. And basically, I would like to ask more about how, if any of you would like to comment on this aspect of secrecy, conspiracy, seduction in relation to this other part of the reflection that appeals to the mind and the self-reflection and the critique.
Okay, so this will leave it just for Professor Chang and Professor Achille Mbembe then. I also, like Gabi, wanted to bring up something I think has been kind of underlying a huge amount of the afternoon session and part of the morning session about the relationship between design and its existence as an embodiment of any given philosophy of the good life, how we should live our life, how we as users, consumers, producers interact with given objects which give restraint and limits upon our possibilities. But I was wondering, sitting here listening to all of these really fascinating commentaries, about whether we all in this room accept that there was no design in communist China. There's been a very consistent undercurrent of saying there's not design in the 50s and 60s here. There was not, or it's a lesser design if it's a state design. And I'd really, question that, if we could talk about that more. Like, what do we mean is design if we take all of that and say it's not? So what definition of design are we using? If the definition of design we're using, which has, also been at play here, is an embodiment of a philosophy of the good life, then certainly communism and the acts of, say, the Danwei as a physical structure, of the communes, of even those objects that perhaps whatever it was that Terence Conrad saw, of the fabulous posters from socialist realism, from the statuettes, which did inculcate a seduction, a desire, a belief in a certain way of living the life. So, just kind of pushing everyone on, when we say design, do we mean capitalism? Does it have to be a commodity that's purchased for production? What are we actually saying there? Related to push on something that Achille said earlier about China specifically, when we think about design and modernization and that relationship, and modernization as catching up, I'd just like to throw out that many of the discursive conversations around modernization in China from the late, from the turn of the century, 1900 through on, and particularly was important in the Maoist years, was modernization not as catching up, not as mimicking, not as following, but as leapfrogging, to get beyond it, not wanting to actually follow in the steps, but to go beyond. And I think in some ways, Professor Chang was mentioning that in the idea of copying to become good at something than to be able to alter it. I think that way of thinking about copying and fakes is a bit different here, but the way I'd like to push that is thinking of leapfrogging and maybe bringing up the ideas of eco-cities, which we might get to later, in the session, but in thinking about why those are so important here. And I think it's important of thinking through that idea of leapfrogging, design something that goes beyond something, that supersedes or can supersede and take you to a new place. And so thinking of modernization in China not always necessarily being in the realm of just catching up on a ladder or going straight through on a hierarchy.
Okay, maybe we should start at that point and then come into the other questions. So maybe You want
Sure.
to start, and then we come back through.
Maybe there's at least two questions I can respond. And first of all, is yours. Actually, I agree with you. Because I think designs in China from the 60s and 70s, they have real qualities, right? And the question, of course, is how do we define design? And I think what's interesting is that now we define design with the designer behind it. This is probably really problematic, but yet, that's most people, especially people aren't in the field of design, they would have probably identified design, unfortunately. And then, to what extent, even if the designer is not there, and we still think design has to be self-conscious to be design. And that's also something I would love to challenge. And then when you look at designs in China in the 60s and 70s, you have no idea who did them. And then they're not about design. They're about how people may use them. There's one beautiful, beautiful object, which I don't know if you can still get it. It's a thermal case made with the leftover metal from the bicycle chains, right? It's about economy, right? People didn't even know the term of sustainability in whatever language then, and so on. But in combination, design intelligence, economy, of course, aesthetics, and so on, we're all there. So I don't know if we can go back there, but I think there are lessons, a lot of lessons about design to be learned. And then that's that. And then I was of course half joking about conspiracy theory, but there's something because the Chinese, there are two words, right? 设 and 技. It really means that. You wonder why. Although 技, the second word, could also mean strategy. It's more neutral, of course. What's interesting is that it really has to do with the fact, and I said it in a different way, how much people need to understand design to use design. That's sort of an odd thing to say, but I was talking about iPhone, but I have this really old, not iPhone here. Because I think for the younger generation, you're natural. You just know how to use it. I need to use.
They're all cyborgs.
This pen to write Chinese on this phone. But I guess what I'm saying is that again, so there is something about design. I would simply say it is knowledge based. So to seduce people to consume is one thing, but to seduce people to really to engage design, I think we actually set up design as a trap. So the design trap is actually, it is a strategy. I have gone through the whole cycle and back to the notion of conspiracy. So we have to differentiate in the end what is about desire and consumption, but what is actually this invitation to design. I hope that for us, for architects and designers and so on, really is the later is something. The latter we need to work on.
Okay. First thing, I would just like to say that I have been using the term design. Sarah said we have to rehabilitate the term. I understand that rehabilitation being a way of taking the term out of its the term has been, if you wish, stultified. It has become a status. So the challenge is, how is it that we take it down from that position of status in order to reanimate it and give it a new lease of life, so that it might speak beyond its classical meaning. That's the operation I've been interested in. So when I say design, I do not necessarily mean use it in the sense they use it at the school at the new school, the Parsons School of Design. I use it outside of that. I don't mean to be naughty with the colleagues who are coming from the new school here, but I just want to make that specific, precise, that as far as I can see, the term has been stultified, and the challenge is to reanimate it today. So that's one thing. The term composition, which I have been using, which I have been saying, refers basically to a context of scarcity, but David was reminding me of the fact that that is not necessarily the case. The term composition, of course, in the context in which I use it, refers to a whole set of things. It refers, first of all, to a certain kind of performative quality. Putting together things which are originating from very different sources. I mean, the capacity, if you come to Johannesburg, Lagos, Kinshasa, or Abidjan, you will be astonished at the capacity people have, including ordinary people, to assemble, put in an ensemble, things which originally were not conceived to be put together. Bringing together things which are of different origins, creating new objects out of these heterogeneous parts, all of that in order to fulfill old functions. So new objects designed to fulfill old functions. And so that hybridity on the one hand, and that recourse to multiple media, it seems to me is absolutely central to the process of composition. The second thing which is absolutely central to this process of composition has to do with its anti-canonical nature. That composition, if you wish, by essence, is anti-canonical. And it calls for two other features. One, informality. When we know that, I mean, classical design has to do with forms. And here the work is to inform, deform, whatever you want. Informality on the one hand, and improvisation on the other. Capacity of improvisation, which itself refers to all questions of time, which I have already alluded to. And one last thing, provisionality. Things have to be provisional, as opposed to monuments, the aim of which is to be eternal, basically to write eternity into a structure that is made visible. Here, what we have to deal with is provisionality. So it seems to me that composition has to be, let's say, I was trying to disassemble what I mean by that. Now, of course, power, I mean, the prosaics of power is what? It's on the one hand to stylize itself. You recognize it by the ways in which it dresses up. I mean, I don't know about here, but where I come from, where I was born in any case, power dresses up in a certain manner. I mean, I don't look like a man of power if I dress up like this. Beautiful. Or the seductive, insofar as its aim is to subjugate people. Draw them into a state of wonder. They have to wonder, to be in awe. What is that? The US, that operation
Shock and awe.
Shock.
You've got to remember the shock as well.
No, in this case, it's Operation Wonder and Awe. It's not shock necessarily, although it might. But these are, I mean, this is the everyday practice of stylizing when it comes to power. It has to do with self-design in that case. And the second thing is to produce subjects who think and act at the image of power itself, as I have described it. They want all of us to act in the same manner as themselves. And where it fails, therefore, where I talk about failure and fake, it has to do with when people do not believe it. When disbelief enters into the equation. Then power starts turning in the void. And that's when you realize that it has entered the realm of fakery. And how is it that you impose fake on people who have stopped believing? You do it by all means of coercion. And in that sense, it seems to me that seduction is a very tricky, very slippery process. It's very slippery because you can seduce and try to seduce at least, and all what I see is comedy. And I start laughing at your expense. So seduction, we have to problematize it a bit more and understand very well that, first of all, it does not always succeed, which is its very nature, and that it might always produce, counter effect. But look, on the question of modernization, look, I'm a... Okay, let's just leave it there.
I think we've got time for one more round. I've got Akbar, I've got a question over here, and is anyone else as well? Because I think we'll probably just get one more. Okay, we've got about 3 or 4. So I go 1, 2, 3, and is it 4 and 5 or just 4? Are there two over just 4 in the, and David yourself? Yeah, keep it short. Okay, just small. If people can keep the contributions.
Okay,
to the point. So.
Dr. Chang, you mentioned that a main essential function of design is to make people's lives better, and I was just wondering, considering the comments of Dr. Mbembe about design as exercise of power, or domain of design as being spaces, places, and territory, when we talk about exploited and superfluous populations, it seems like a major essential function of design is to make, if what Dr. Mbembe is saying is correct, to make people's lives worse. And so I just wonder how you would address that, or within the current context, is the central function of design to make people's life worse, to contain superfluous populations, to more efficiently exploit exploited populations, and how would you address that from the perspective of a designer?
Okay, and then we have one over here, then over here, and back. Maybe just, I think, middle. If people can again introduce themselves just for today, I think maybe.
Oh, hi, I'm Sylvia from UC Irvine. Perhaps a question particular to Chang Ho. You mentioned earlier, there's sort of this design philosophy of like, for us designers to make people's lives better. And then, we talked a lot about during the discussion and this panel about, how design is then also, used to influence certain behaviors of people. And then I wanted to bring up particularly that issue of sustainability and environmental concerns that is very often used across different cultural contexts in the US and China and Europe as sort of a framework for new design approaches, not necessarily to actually change much, but it becomes very often the sort of like, framework to make design sound, to have like a better purpose. And this comes very often up in a community that people who are in my department, informatics at UC Irvine, sort of speak to, which is sort of like the urban design community or ubiquitous computing design. So a lot of people who care about, making use of technology that's more than just like the next new gadget or a wasteful product. But then very often these design approaches end up as a quite empty rhetoric of like, we design for the green environment, we design for like a sustainability or sustainable approach and new design. So I wanted to hear more from your viewpoint on how this is taken up in China, if it is similarly to the United States, sort of like part of this like new rhetoric and new marketing language of new technology design or of new urban design, or if you see also an activist scene emerging there that might perhaps, you know, also counteract those sort of like marketing language around new sustainable design.
Right. And then I think one, is it yourself?
Hi.
I think it's the microphone's just coming.
Kristen Koptiuk. I have been thinking about how you were talking about design as a part of a project of rule, design as a production of desire, and I'm thinking about my own interests of migrants and urbanism, and thinking about all these tall buildings that are out there built to designers' specifications by migrants very often to the city, who at the same time build their own homes in squatter settlements and whatnot without being accorded the recognition of designers per se. And I'm very happy that Achille, you brought up a kind of design from below sort of vision that reminds us that there are other practitioners of design besides those who get the official stamp of designer. And I would like to hear about the importance of keeping both of those sorts of designers and the elements that they design in the picture at the same time.
This is going to be a quick, facetious, ad hominem remark to Achille. I mean, you said, I think, very interestingly, that power dresses up. But I think we could also say, by the same token, that power dresses down as well. Like, for example, you, and you pointed to yourself, right, as a person, right? Now, that, I think, is very powerful. Right? It's like Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates never has to dress up, right? I mean, Bill Gates dresses down. But the serious point maybe behind this is that it's really very difficult to get from the visual to the meaning behind it. I mean, it's something that's happened to visuality. I mean, there's a certain disconnect, as we were saying earlier on, right, between images and the meanings. And I think this is also an issue when we talk about power and design and power. And, you know, the other remarks.
Okay, maybe very brief comments to conclude, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Okay. First of all, I think that question really is about the value of design, meaning that when you originally design something and then you have your intention and then you give a value to the design, it doesn't mean that the end user would see the same value or use it the same way. So that's the tragedy of the baseball bat. It's designed to play baseball, and then often you see it as a weapon. So it wasn't really designed as a weapon. But I wonder, for us, designers in the most general terms, that there is a design challenge. Can you design a baseball bat which cannot be used as a weapon? No, that would be the next generation of baseball bat design. But yet, the new baseball bat could be used in some other ways. So anyway, so that's just something. So when we see something expensive, it probably doesn't also really worth the money. But as a designer, we have no control. The real estate market is going mad in China. Not because of design, really. And then back to the sustainability question, my fear also, it could be really get trivialized very fast in China. Especially, China is in a very different position from the U.S., and the government is very much interested in sustainability, and so it actually pushes it pretty hard. And the Communist Party actually put it on its agenda for the 17th National Congress and so on. But in reality, because the momentum of the market economy is still that, and then also the lack of knowledge and technology to some extent, you don't see a lot of implementation. So, so the current moment actually is pretty critical. We could just make it into another sales slogan, and or we can actually do something real. So, we don't know which way it's going, but we all should really take part to help that it would get onto the right course.
Okay, at that point we've overrun with time, and I know that in your readings you have I think you have Beckett's Endgame or part of Endgame, and I think it's in Endgame. I'm not sure it's in that clip. The Beckett says, "Fail again, fail better," which I think none of the speakers have done. So if people can, in recognising their contribution, also, I don't know whether David, you had any logistical